It seems to me that just because, let's say you have a happy person, a flourishing person, obviously that doesn't mean that they don't feel unpleasant things.
Hmm.
And so you might ask, what is the distinction there? What separates someone that is, let's say, as an example, we have a couple that's arguing. And if they really love each other and they want the best for each other, and you take them out of that argument, even if they're really heated, and you ask them, do you still love this person? Do you still want to stay with this person and help them and you want to get through this? They should say, yes, of course. This is just an argument we're having, but we're going to get through it. But then if you take like a toxic relationship and they're arguing, and then you take one of them out and you ask them the same question, they could be homicidal, right? They could really be like, no, I'm really at my wit's end here with this person. And and because it's so toxic, and by that I mean, not only do you not want them to flourish, you want them to have the opposite of a flourishing life, and you're actively seeking that out. That's like a
Hmm.
toxic relationship in my mind.
Right.
But I don't know, like, is there some kind of distinction there? Is that thought about at all in sociology? It's like, how do we deal with these darker or let's say unpleasant times in life, even if our life as a whole is, let's say, happy or flourishing?
Oof, in
That's a tough one.
sociology. Yeah. I suppose any discussion like this requires distinguishing for the Stoics happiness in a rationalized, virtuous way, eudaimonic happiness versus happiness as feeling good. And sociology, if it's if it's looking at happiness individually, then and it's asking people whether they're happy, then it's probably referring to the conventional, the latter definition, the idea of do you feel good, and less are you behaving rationally, less are you behaving virtuously, etc. As for your, in terms of whether if people are in these relationships and they're not necessarily virtuously minded regarding how they're interacting with each other. Uh, Sociology would probably be interested in that only from the question of what impels people to treat people poorly that they are nevertheless invested in a relationship, they share a happiness with. What impels these people to behave this way, even though they actually would probably hope for the best for this person because they're their partner, let's say. And once sociology opens those questions, it looks at things collectively. So it's part of the distinction between sociology and psychology. Where psychology is trying to track quite often, not exclusively, an individual narrative from youth or pre-youth to adulthood. What happened to you when you were younger, which made you behave like this towards someone you love when you're older? Sociology, whilst it won't ignore those questions, will look at the motivations and the outcomes from people's behaviors in terms of what's going on in a more horizontally present sense. So, what is it about a collective mind that impels you to do what you're doing? And that could come down to any number of variables that we don't have time to explore, but it could be as simple as things like if you're in a certain socioeconomic group, then the pressures that you feel from being in that socioeconomic group will lead you to behave irrationally towards someone you love at a localized sense, perhaps, and this is where the psychology would come in, perhaps to gain a certain control in the domestic sphere that you don't have in the public sphere. Because let's say you are in the lower socioeconomic group and your friends make more money than, or whatever it might be, and you feel like you're disempowered in a public way, you can try to gain some of that power back in the private sphere, even though ironically you might be doing it with someone that you actually care about, and so your actions won't reflect your feel. They won't reflect how you feel, but rather it would reflect something that was going on or even something that you think, but something that was going on that was influencing you. And this is probably where Stoicism could re-enter the conversation and say, and they'd be quite concerned about this, and they would say you're behaving irrationally because you're worried about this thing. In this case, socioeconomics. You're worried about how much money you have, and that's affecting how you're behaving, and you're behaving irrationally as a consequence of you being so invested in what they would call an external, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I can definitely understand. I mean, when you're dealing with people that have such issues, I think the environment obviously, very obviously, can have a huge effect on us. And the Stoic question is, does it have to? Right? Or do you have agency over your life? Can you change your perception on something like my income level? Obviously, assuming you're getting what you need to, you're getting basic food and hopefully a bit of shelter and that kind of stuff. Because I do think that Stoicism is based on something resembling a functioning psychology, and that is,
Yeah,
if you're
yeah.
deprived enough, and I think people like Alexander Solzhenitsyn or Viktor Frankl, I think they pushed the envelope on what it meant to have a functioning psychology under very harsh conditions. But yeah, I certainly do think that for the most part we can kind of change our perspective on those things, even though that pressure can be severe.